All right, so today our lesson 6.3 is going to be about using proportions to solve problems. And our learning intention is that today we're learning about percents and proportions. Our success criteria is I can use proportional relationships to solve problems. So the first thing we want to talk about is what are ratios. And we talked about this in our last unit. We did an intro of it just to review because it's something you should already know. But just as a review, a ratio is a comparison of two quantities which describe the same attribute. They can be written in several ways. So when we're talking about the same attribute, it just means that they're grouped together in some way. So for example, there are two dogs to every three cats. We could write those in words where we write the words 2 to 3. We could write it with a colon where you see I have 2:3, or you can write it as a fraction of 2/3. And those all mean the same thing. Now, one thing we want to keep in mind, we could not write it as 3/2. It would not mean the same thing because we have to make sure that we keep it in order or we have it labeled in some way. We're saying there's two dogs to every three cats. If we had 3/2, it wouldn't be describing the same ratio. So here, let's go ahead. Tell me, what is the ratio of tomatoes to onions? The ratio of tomatoes to onions is 4/3. What is the ratio of phones to binoculars? The ratio of phones to binoculars is 2/3. And really, just to write a ratio, we're just writing, we don't even have to simplify it for these. We're just writing how many things of each we see and comparing them to each other. So now here's the question. If I were to write the ratio of onions to tomatoes, would I have an equivalent ratio? Why or why not? So this is going back to the question that you had before. You had tomatoes to onions, but if I were to do onions to tomatoes, would it be an equivalent ratio? So if I were to write the ratio of onions to tomatoes instead of tomatoes to onions, I would not have an equivalent ratio. I want you to think about it as if you have if you have like an equivalent fraction really. Onions to tomatoes is 3/4. Tomatoes to onions is 4/3, and 3/4 is not equal to 4/3. So you have to make sure that you keep your comparisons in order. If you switch it, it's not correct. You don't have the right ratio. So now let's get into what proportions are. Proportion just shows two ratios in the form of an equation. And proportion means that they are two equal ratios. And that's really important to know too, is that a proportion is two equal ratios. So here we can solve proportions and see if they are by something called scaling or setting up an equation and solving. And to figure out what we can do with scaling, you just are figuring out what you're multiplying by. So here I'm going from 3 to 24. When I do 3 to 24, I just have to figure out what I am multiplying 3 by to get 24. In this case, I'm going to multiply by 8. So then I multiply 2 by 8 and I get 16. Now it works over here and you can see I actually have the wrong answer because I was mistyped, but we can go through and get this fixed. So here we're going to do something called cross multiplying. And with cross multiplying, what we do is we just go through and we multiply directly across. We go diagonally. So when we cross multiply, we're going to say, okay, well, 2 times 24 is equal to 3 times x. And that's how we figure out if it is proportional, or we figure out what the solution is. So when I do 2 times 24, I get 48. And 48 is equal to 3x. So then I just go through and I divide what's left over by 3 and I get 16. So it's really just like solving an equation. And that's really the way that I'm going to be showing you primarily. So here, let's go ahead and apply together. Let's go ahead first and figure out our ratios. So a surf shop likes to keep 8 life jackets in stock for every 5 pairs of goggles. So what I want to know right now, what are the ratios of life jackets to goggles and goggles to total? Okay, the ratio of life jackets to goggles is 8 to 5, and the goggles to total is 5 to 13. And when we find the ratio, we can use those to help solve problems like the next one. So we're still sticking with the surf shop. We're saying, okay, well, they like to keep 8 life jackets in stock for every 5 pairs of goggles. So if they have 40 pairs of goggles ordered, how many life jackets should be ordered? And if 30 goggles are ordered, how many items total will be ordered? So here you can see, and I'm going to show you what I did, is if I order 40 pairs of goggles, I would order a total of 64 life jackets. And here's how I did that. I went through and I did 8 times 40. When I did 8 times 40, I got 320. And that is a 2. And I know you're going to make fun of me, but it is a 2. So 320. So what I do is I multiply across and I divide by what's left over. So when I do 320 divided by 5, I get 64. So the next question, and I used my original ratio. It says 30 goggles are ordered. How many items total will be ordered? Well, we said if I have 5 goggles, I have 13 items total. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cross multiply. When I do 13 times 30, I end up with 390. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and divide by what's left over, which is 5. When I do 390 divided by 5, I end up with 78 items total. So let's go ahead and apply together. The ratio of creamy to crunchy peanut butter jars on a grocery store shelf is 5 to 3. There are 8 jars of crunchy peanut butter. How many jars of peanut butter are on the shelf? So in this problem, I had to first figure out what I was comparing. I was comparing the ratio of crunchy peanut butter to the total jars of peanut butter. So not crunchy to creamy. You want to make sure what your comparison is. So I said, well, if I have 3 jars of crunchy, I have 8 I have a total of 8 peanut butters because I'm saying 5 crunchy plus 3 creamy is 8. So that's how I got those numbers here. So then I said, well, if I have 8 jars of crunchy peanut butter, how many peanut butters do I have on the shelf? So again, I go through and I cross multiply. And on this one, we're going to actually round because 8 times 8 is 64. Okay. 64 divided by 3 is going to be about 21. We're not going to have a half jar of peanut butter because let's be honest, if I went into a store and they gave me a partial jar of peanut butter, I'd be ticked off. So we're just going to go for the closest whole number. When we do 64 divided by 3, we get 21, which is the closest number that we'll have for that. So let's try another one. So for this one, Christy travels by a plane at an average speed of 387.5 miles per hour for 3 hours. We want to know, how far does she travel? So again, what I did is I set up my proportion. I figured out that I'm saying, okay, I am doing 387 miles per hour. That just means in 1 hour, I traveled that far on a plane. So then I'm saying, well, I'm traveling for 3 hours. And you'll notice how I have miles to miles and hours to hours lined up. I could do this in another way where I could do miles on one side and hours on the other. This time because I like to do that comparison this way, it's a little easier for me to see, but just know that as long as you have same with same, it works. So like here, what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and cross multiply. So I'm going to do 387.5 times 3, which is what I have right here. And then I'm going to do 1 times x, which is what I have here. When I do 387.5 times 3, I get 1,162.5 miles, which equals 1x or which equals x. So we're saying we would travel 1,162.5 miles. So on this one, we want to see the ratio. This should be 3 to 8. And I think I corrected it on something, but obviously I did not correct it here. So 3 to 8 is equivalent to the ratio of 24 to 64. Which of the proportions below are equivalent? Choose all that apply. And so what I want you to do, there's 2 different ways that you could write this. I want you to make sure that you are writing this correctly. Okay, the 2 equations that we have that are the same are the two ratios we have proportions we have are the same are C and D. And here's how it goes. We're saying that no matter what, we're saying that 3 has to be partnered with both 8 and 24 because it's because 3 is partnered with 8. So here we're saying we have 8 to 3, okay? And then that means 24 has to be next to it, okay? Now here I have 3 to 24, which means 8 has to be next to it. So it has to form kind of an L for that relationship and then whatever's left over. So if you figure out what your L is, you're good to go. All right. What I want you to do now is go ahead and click on the link for the quizzes. Make sure that you have finished filling out your note guide because you know that I will be collecting it. Do the quizzes and then do the formative. Make sure that as you're completing these assignments, that you are doing them in the order that they are given on Google Classroom. It is a checklist. Don't do the formative before you do the ed puzzle because that doesn't work. You haven't taken the notes on it. You haven't watched the video. So make sure that you're getting these done first.